June 3rd, 1942. Midway Atoll, Central Pacific. The ocean is still, an unsettling kind of still, the kind that makes even seasoned sailors glance at the horizon twice. On the deck of the USS Enterprise, Ensign William Carter tightens the straps on his flight vest, listening to the distant hum of engines warming in the hangars below. The sun hasn't fully risen, but the sky is already stained a pale blue, almost too peaceful for what the day is about to become. Carter wipes the sweat from his palms and mutters to the crew chief beside him. Feels like the whole ocean's holding its breath. The chief only nods. Men don't waste words on mornings like this. Across the Pacific, on the flagship of the Japanese carrier force, the Akagi, the mood is entirely different. Vice Admiral Nagumo stands near the island structure, scanning the water with binoculars. His strike groups are ready, his pilots confident. For months, Japan has swept across the Pacific with frightening speed, capturing territory and crushing opposition. American carriers, once considered pests to be swatted aside, are the only threat left. And today, Nagumo believes that threat will be eliminated. But beneath the surface of that confidence lies a truth he cannot see. The Americans already know he is coming. They have cracked the Japanese naval code. Every move he makes is being shadowed. Down in the map room, aboard the USS Enterprise, Commander Miles Browning runs a finger along the plotted course of the Japanese fleet, whispering to Admiral Raymond Spruance. They think they're the hunters. They don't realize they're walking straight into a trap. Spruance nods. His face is tight, composed. But inside he feels the weight of history pressing down. If they fail here, Hawaii could be next. If they succeed, the entire balance of the Pacific could shift. Before sunrise, Carter climbs into the cockpit of his SBD Dauntless dive bomber. The seat is cold against his back. He flicks the magneto switches, and the right cyclone engine coughs, rattles, then roars to life. The whole aircraft vibrates with raw, metallic energy. He doesn't know yet that within 24 hours, Japanese naval power will be shattered, and that men on the other side of this ocean will look at burning carriers and realize for the first time that their empire is doomed. For now, all he knows is the thudding of his own heartbeat. At 0430 hours, the Enterprise's signal officer raises 2 flags. Launch order. The deck crew snaps into action. Chocks pulled, wings unfolded, engines screaming, salt spray whipping off the water as the first aircraft taxis forward. Carter watches the aircraft ahead of him rise into the pale morning sky. His turn. He pushes the throttle forward and feels the Dauntless surge down the deck, the wooden planks rushing beneath him. At the edge, for a split second, the bomber drops and his stomach twists, before the aircraft catches lift and climbs toward the rising sun. Below him, the Pacific stretches endlessly, a blue desert. Somewhere out there, the most powerful fleet Japan has ever assembled sails toward destroyers, torpedoes, and fate. Aboard the Akagi, pilots eat rice balls and sip green tea, unaware that American reconnaissance planes are already tracking their force. A petty officer jokes that today will be an easy hunt. Another pilot laughs and says, "We should save some bombs for Pearl Harbor, for the return visit." Most men smile, a few pretend to. On the bridge, Nagumo receives conflicting scout reports, and for the first time that morning, uncertainty slips in. Should he rearm his aircraft for ship attack, or should he keep them loaded for striking Midway's defenses? Minutes tick by, too many minutes. Decisions in naval warfare can be fatal, but decisions made too slowly can be catastrophic. At 0600, on the American side, Admiral Spruance leans over the chart table and issues a command that will define the next 3 years of war. Launch everything, we attack immediately. It is bold, risky, some say reckless, but it is exactly the kind of move the Japanese do not expect. As Carter's squadron pushes deeper into the sky, clouds rolling beneath them like soft grey mountains, he cannot shake the feeling that today is larger than any man, larger than any mission. He taps the photo tucked into his flight suit, his younger sister, smiling on her graduation day, and whispers, "Let me get back home." Behind him, engines drone like 1,000 wasps. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, 4 Japanese carriers cut through the water. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryū. 4 giants of the Imperial Navy. By tomorrow morning, 3 will be gone, and Japan will finally understand the truth its admirals have feared in silence. They cannot replace these ships, they cannot replace these pilots, and after Midway, they cannot win the Pacific War. The sky ahead begins to darken. Carter tightens his oxygen mask. The Battle of Midway is about to begin. June 4th, 1942, so 700 hours, 15,000 feet above the Pacific. The morning sun has climbed high enough to burn away the last traces of dawn, revealing a battlefield that none of the pilots can yet see. Ensign William Carter keeps his Dauntless steady as the flight formation pushes west. The radio crackles with static, wind, and nervous breathing. No one speaks unless necessary. Every man is listening, waiting for the sight that will change everything. Then it happens. A burst of excitement over the radio. Contact multiple ships bearing 275. Carter's heart jumps. He cranes his neck, searching. At first he sees nothing but ocean, shimmering, bright, and endless. Then, like dark scars against the water, the shapes emerge. Ships, dozens of them. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers. And in the center, 4 enormous flat silhouettes slicing forward in perfect formation. The Japanese carriers, the beating heart of the Imperial Navy. Carter exhales shakily. There they are, he whispers. Below, on the deck of the Akagi, flight crews rush frantically between rows of aircraft. The air smells of fuel, sweat, and heated metal. Mechanics haul bombs across the deck, shouting orders. Runners sprint between commanders. Nagumo stands silent, expression tightening as he reviews the most recent report. Enemy carriers confirmed in the area. He hesitates. The strike force meant for Midway is already armed with high-explosive bombs, not armor-piercing bombs, needed to attack ships. Changing the loadout would take precious time, but leaving them as is would reduce the effectiveness of a carrier strike. In those few moments of uncertainty, fate tilts. Aboard the USS Enterprise, Admiral Spruance's order echoes forward. Attack immediately. No delays. No waiting for perfect conditions. Carter checks his altimeter and sees the numbers ticking down. The squadron leader's voice crackles in his ears. All right, boys. We go in. Far below, the Japanese fleet has not yet spotted them. Carrier decks bustle with activity. Bombs being hoisted. Torpedoes being mounted. Fuel hoses snaking across the wooden planks. The Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryū, the pride of the Imperial Navy, are moments from launching the strike that Nagumo believes will annihilate the American carriers. But their aircraft are still on deck, exposed, vulnerable, packed wing to wing with bombs, fuel, and open hatches. It is the most dangerous moment for any carrier, and the Americans are approaching at exactly this moment. On Carter's left, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, the air group commander, scans the ocean through narrowed eyes. He should have found the Japanese carriers earlier. Their last known position was off, too far east. His instinct tells him the Japanese must have changed course. But where? Then McCluskey notices something odd. A single Japanese destroyer racing northwest at flank speed, leaving a white wake like a scar across the sea. Destroyers do not sprint alone. They escort carriers. McCluskey tightens his jaw. There you are, he murmurs. Over the radio, his voice is low but steady. Follow that destroyer. Carter banks his Dauntless. His stomach lurches as the sky tilts and the formation swings sharply north. The wind screams past the cockpit. Below, the destroyer churns through the water like a predator, leading them toward its pack. 10 minutes later, the horizon bursts open. 4 carriers, columns of smoke from their funnels, fleets of aircraft crowding their decks. The Japanese still have not seen the Americans. Carter's throat dries. His hands tremble on the controls. This is the moment pilots dream of and fear. Dive bombing a carrier means dropping nearly vertical through flak, bullets, and fire. It means trusting that your aim is true. It means knowing that if you miss, you may not climb out again. The squadron fans out. McCluskey's voice calls through the radio. Target Kaga, prepare to dive. The Dauntless bombers peel off one by one, their noses tilting down, wings trembling as they plunge into the dive. The howl of wind grows deafening. The altimeter spins downward. Carter feels his body compress under the sudden vertical drop. Below, Japanese crewmen look up, stunned, as the sky fills with descending American aircraft. Shouts erupt across the deck. Teki kogeki, enemy attack! Klaxons scream. Anti-aircraft guns roar, but it is too late. The Japanese decks are still cluttered with aircraft, mid-rearmament, bombs unsecured, fuel hoses uncoiled like deadly ribbons. Carter lines up the cargo in his sight. The carrier seems to swell in size as he plummets. He sees the flight deck crew scattering. The gleam of torpedoes stacked along the edges, the rows of aircraft packed tightly beside each other. 5,000 feet, 3,000, 2,000. He squeezes the release. The bomb drops, a dark shape tumbling away. Carter pulls back with all his strength. The Dauntless groans, shuddering violently as G-forces slam into him. His vision blurs, his lungs feel crushed. For a moment, he can't breathe. Then the Dauntless levels out. Behind him, a blinding fireball erupts on the cargo. The deck vanishes under flames. Secondary explosions rip through the carrier. Bombs, fuel, torpedoes, setting off chain reactions that tear the ship apart from the inside. Smoke billows upward in thick black columns. Carter stares in disbelief. The cargo is dying. But the nightmare for Japan is only beginning, because at almost the exact same moment, on the opposite side of the formation, American bombers strike the Akagi and Soryu. 3 carriers hit within minutes, 3 carriers burning, 3 irreplaceable giants of the Imperial Navy wounded beyond salvation. On the bridge of the Akagi, Nagumo feels the deck shudder beneath his feet. The ship lurches violently. Flames scatter across the flight deck like living creatures. An officer stumbles in, face pale. "Admiral, the attack has begun." Nagumo stares out over the inferno, erupting across his flagship. Smoke rises in enormous plumes. Men run across the deck, shouting, some on fire, some disappearing into the smoke. For the first time in the war, he feels something he has never felt before. Fear, and something colder beneath it. Doom. In the sky, Carter circles back. The fleet below is a scene of chaos. Burning decks, frantic destroyers racing to rescue survivors, torpedo explosions in the water. And yet one thing becomes immediately clear. Japan has just lost the heart of its carrier force. June 4th, 1942, late morning. The sky over the Pacific has become a chaotic tapestry of smoke plumes, spiraling aircraft, and the distant thunder of explosions. Ensign William Carter steadies his Dauntless as he circles for altitude, sweat dripping into his eyes despite the oxygen-chilled air rushing through the cockpit vents. Below him, 3 Japanese carriers burn like floating furnaces. Kaga, Akagi, Soryu, each one vomiting thick black smoke that twists upward like mourning banners. The destruction is almost surreal. These ships had terrorized the Pacific for 6 months. They had shattered Pearl Harbor. They had crushed British forces in Malaya. And now, in barely 10 minutes, they have been mortally wounded. Carter feels a strange mix of triumph and disbelief knotting inside his chest. He tightens his grip on the control stick, steadying his breathing. But the battle is not over. Not yet. On the bridge of the Akagi, Vice Admiral Nagumo stands amid the choking smoke, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles whiten beneath the grime. Flames race unchecked across the hangar deck below. Secondary explosions shake the ship at irregular intervals. Bombs, ammunition, fuel tanks, all erupting in deadly bursts. Officers rush to him for orders, but Nagumo's eyes are locked on the inferno outside the shattered windows. He has commanded fleets for decades, served the Empire with absolute conviction, but nothing in his long career prepared him for the sight of 3 carriers dying at once. "We were supposed to be the hunters," he murmurs under his breath. Though no one hears it, the truth presses against him with crushing weight. Japan cannot replace these ships, not quickly, not with trained pilots, not with experienced flight crews. Each explosion feels like a nail driven into the future of the Empire. High overhead, Carter banks sharply as tracers streak past from Japanese anti-aircraft guns, still firing desperately at retreating bombers. He pulls the Dauntless into a climb, engine rattling from strain and low fuel. His gunner, Petty Officer Daniel Greeley, shouts over the intercom, "One more carrier! Hiryū's still afloat, Carter nods. The Hiryū, the last untouched Japanese carrier, is already launching her own counterstrike, a final desperate attempt to salvage the day. Japanese pilots climb into the sky with grim determination, many of them veterans of the early war victories. Their aircraft streak eastward toward the American carriers, engines howling. Aboard the USS Yorktown, sailors scramble as the first wave of Japanese dive bombers descends. Sirens blare. The deck crew braces. Carter watches from miles away, helpless and horrified, as plumes of fire burst from the Yorktown's flight deck. Japanese bombs slam into the carrier, tearing open steel plating and sending towers of flame roaring upward. Yet the Yorktown refuses to die. Damage control teams work furiously, sealing compartments, patching holes, battling fires despite smoke so thick it blinds them. The carrier limps, slows, then stubbornly regains way. But the Hiryū sends another wave. Torpedo planes skim just above the water, their engines whining as they close in. They drop their torpedoes in perfect formation, each one slicing a white trail toward the wounded American ship. Carter sees the impacts even from the distance. Massive plumes of water erupt as torpedoes strike the hull. The Yorktown shudders, lists, and smoke gushes from her sides. This time, the damage is fatal. Sailors leap overboard as orders to abandon ship echo through the flaming corridors. The mighty carrier that helped win the morning is now dying in the afternoon. But the Japanese celebration is short. American bombers, launched from Enterprise and Hornet, find the Hiryū in the late afternoon. Carter hears the radio chatter, the tense voices of pilots beginning their dives. Then, far off on the horizon, he sees a bloom of orange flame rising from the last Japanese carrier. The Hiryū convulses under the impact of multiple bombs, her deck erupting in fire. In minutes, she too becomes a burning skeleton, drifting helplessly on the waves. 4 carriers lost in one day, 4 pillars of Japanese naval power, 4 symbols of an empire that believed itself destined for Pacific domination. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, Carter looks down through the fading light at the wreckage below. The oil slicks spreading like dark stains, the survivors clinging to rafts, the shattered ships burning silently. And for the first time since the war began, the men aboard Japan's fleet feel a cold certainty settling into their bones. They have not just suffered a defeat, they have suffered a catastrophe, a blow so deep it cannot be undone by courage, training, or loyalty. The Empire's carrier force, the very spearhead of its expansion, lies broken under the clouds, and every admiral who stares at those burning ruins knows the same truth. Japan is no longer the master of the Pacific. She is no longer even the equal. She is doomed. June 4th, 1942. Night falls slowly over the Pacific, settling like a heavy blanket over the smouldering ruins of the greatest carrier battle the world has ever seen. The sky shifts from bruised purple to deep black, stars shimmering faintly above the drifting smoke. Ensign William Carter guides his Dauntless back toward the Enterprise, engine coughing from bullet holes and low fuel. He squints through the dim cockpit window, searching for the carrier's outline, and spots it at last. A grey shape, illuminated by the soft glow of deck lights, carefully shielded to avoid detection. He lands hard, the wheels bouncing once before gripping the deck. Deck crew rush forward, guiding him to a stop. When Carter climbs out, his legs nearly buckle. The adrenaline is gone, only exhaustion remains. Across the ocean, aboard a Japanese destroyer pulling survivors from the water, the atmosphere is the opposite, quiet, somber, stunned. Hundreds of men from the Kaga, Akagi, Soryu, and Hiryū cling to rafts or debris, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of burning fuel still spreading across the waves. Some sailors whisper prayers, others stare blankly into the dark horizon, unable to comprehend how everything they believed in collapsed in a single day. Officers walk among them with forced calm, whispering assurances they barely believed themselves. Many of these men had sailed from Japan, convinced of their invincibility. They had tasted victory at Pearl Harbor, the Indian Ocean, the Philippines, Now they float in salty water, surrounded by fire, and understand with crushing clarity that those victories blinded them. On the bridge of the Japanese battleship Haruna, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto receives the reports in silence, one after another. Officers step forward, their voices hollow, delivering the same brutal truth. All 4 carriers are lost. Thousands of pilots and mechanics, men trained for years, are gone. Yamamoto lowers his head, the weight of the Empire resting on his shoulders. No one speaks, no one moves. The hum of engines and the distant crackle of fires are the only sounds on the ship. Finally, after several long seconds, Yamamoto whispers words that will never be recorded but are remembered by those who stood near him. The defeat is irreparable. He knows exactly what this means. Japan possesses neither the oil reserves nor the industrial capacity to build new carriers quickly. More importantly, they cannot reproduce the irreplaceable pilots who drowned or burned today. Even if Japan launches new carriers, they will be staffed by inexperienced crews. The American factories, in contrast, are already roaring to life, mass-producing engines, aircraft, and ships with a speed and scale Japan cannot hope to match. Midway has not just cost Japan carriers, it has cost Japan the future. Back aboard the Enterprise, officers and crew gather in a dim briefing room, lit by a single overhead lamp. Maps lie scattered across the table, some stained with sweat, coffee, or blood from minor injuries, hastily bandaged. Commander Miles Browning leans against a bulkhead, arms crossed, while Admiral Spruance studies the reports. When Carter and several other exhausted pilots enter the room, heads turn. Spruance nods at them with quiet respect. "You boys changed the war today," he says, his voice steady but tinged with awe. Carter sits heavily on a bench, feeling the emotional weight of the day settle onto him. He knows they hit the carriers. He saw the explosions, but hearing the full extent of the victory, the destruction of 4 Japanese carriers, feels unreal. The room falls silent for a long moment as each man absorbs the enormity of what they've done. Hundreds of miles away, Japanese survivors watch the last flames die around their sinking carriers. In the dark, one young pilot clutches a splintered piece of driftwood, staring toward the horizon with hollow eyes. "We won at Pearl Harbor," he whispers, voice trembling. "How could this happen?" An older petty officer beside him answers, not with anger, but with a weary honesty that breaks through the night air. "Because we believed we could not lose." The words hang between them, stark and undeniable. Every sailor on those rafts feels the same truth sinking into their bones. The Empire had reached too far, too fast, and Midway has snapped its momentum like a steel cable under strain. By midnight, the Pacific is quiet again. Fires burn low on the wrecks, the waves roll gently, carrying the smell of oil and ash. Above them, the stars glitter coldly, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. For the men who survived, American and Japanese alike, this night will remain etched in their memories forever. But for Japan's high command, the realization that comes with the darkness is deeper, sharper, and more devastating. They are no longer on the path to victory. They are on the path to defeat, and the road back does not exist. June 5th, 1942. Dawn breaks over a wounded ocean. The horizon glows faintly orange as sunlight washes over the scattered remains of the battle. Oil slicks drifting like dark veins across the water. Broken masts poking above the surface. Lifeboats and debris scattered in slow motion across miles of open sea. Aboard the USS Enterprise, Ensign William Carter wakes in his bunk after only 2 hours of sleep, his muscles aching, his throat dry from smoke and adrenaline. The ship vibrates with the low, steady hum of engines as it moves cautiously through the area. Searching for any remaining threats, Carter pulls on his flight jacket and steps into the corridor, joining the steady flow of crewmen heading toward mess halls, duty stations, and briefing rooms. The air smells of coffee and diesel fuel, a strangely comforting reminder that the fight, at least for today, is behind them. Far away on the Japanese flagship, Yamato, Admiral Yamamoto sits alone in his private cabin, hunched over a large map illuminated by a dim desk lamp. His face is drawn, his uniform still stained with sea salt from the long, tense night, spent above deck. He moves small wooden markers representing carriers, cruisers, destroyers. But the carriers are gone now, swept from the table by the merciless arithmetic of the past 24 hours. He knows that Japan's navy will never again possess such a powerful force. The battle has exposed a painful truth. Japan lacks the industrial backbone to replace its losses. A single American shipyard can produce more aircraft in a month than Japan can manufacture in 3. American pilots are being trained by the hundreds every week. Japan can barely maintain the skill of its dwindling aircrews. Yamamoto presses a hand against his forehead, eyes closed. He had warned the Imperial High Command before the war that Japan could not win a long conflict against the United States. Midway has proved him right, far sooner and far more brutally than he ever imagined. Meanwhile, Carter enters the ready room aboard the Enterprise, where pilots gather in loose clusters. Their faces tired but alert, maps are pinned to the walls, showing the shifting positions of ships and search grids. Admiral Spruance stands at the front, addressing the air group with calm precision. Gentlemen, our mission now is recovery and pursuit. We will not risk unnecessary losses, but understand this: the enemy's striking power is gone. A ripple of subdued relief moves through the room. Carter exhales slowly, realizing that, for the first time since the war began, the Americans hold the strategic upper hand. Spruance continues. The Japanese will retreat. They must. They cannot sustain another engagement like yesterday. His tone is steady, but the weight of his words is unmistakable. The tide has turned. Across the Pacific, the Japanese remnants withdraw in silence. Destroyers and cruisers limp westward. Decks crowded with wounded sailors and pilots wrapped in blankets, many of them staring blankly at the water. Officers try to maintain discipline, but morale has collapsed. Conversations are hushed, fragmented, filled with disbelief and dread. A young sailor aboard the cruiser Nagara turns to his superior and asks in a trembling voice, "Will we attack again soon?" The officer hesitates before answering, "No, we no longer have the strength." The words, once unthinkable, spread through the ship like cold wind. By midday, American reconnaissance planes confirm what Spruance already suspects. The Japanese fleet is retreating at full speed. The US Navy decides not to chase them into range of enemy land-based aircraft. The victory is already historic. Risking more ships would be folly. Carter stands on the flight deck and watches the horizon, imagining the fleeing enemy ships vanishing into the silence of the Western Pacific. He knows this victory does not end the war. There will be brutal battles ahead. Guadalcanal, the Solomons, the Marshalls, but something fundamental has changed. For the first time, the enemy is running. Back in Tokyo, the news of the defeat is delivered to the Imperial General Headquarters with icy formality. Generals and admirals gather in a private room, their expressions stiff as they read the casualty lists. 4 carriers, a trained air group destroyed, over 3,000 lives lost. A silence falls so heavy that even the footsteps in the corridor outside seem muffled. Finally, one senior officer speaks. "This is the end of our expansion. From this moment we can only defend. No one disagrees. No one dares." As evening settles over the Pacific once more, Carter stands on the Enterprise's deck, staring at the sunset. The sky glows red and gold, the colours reflecting off the calm water like the last embers of a fading fire. He thinks of the men on the Japanese ships, pilots his age, sailors who believed in their country just as fiercely as he believes in his. War has placed them on opposite sides of history, but the truth is the same for both. Midway has changed everything. Japan is no longer the rising force of the Pacific. Its dreams of domination have been extinguished in a single brutal day. And though the war will grind on for years, the path ahead has already been set. The Empire has begun its long descent. June 6, 1942, 2 days after the battle, the Pacific has grown eerily calm, as if the ocean itself is trying to forget the violence it witnessed. A thin mist lingers over the water as the USS Enterprise glides forward on steady engines, her decks busy with repair crews, signalmen, and exhausted pilots trying to snatch moments of rest between operations. Ensign William Carter stands near the bow, leaning against the rail, breathing in the cool morning air. His uniform smells of oil and salt, his eyes heavy from lack of sleep. He watches the waves roll beneath the ship and tries to process the enormity of what his squadron accomplished. The pride is there. Yes, but so too is the sobering realization of how many men died on both sides, how many futures ended in fire and steel. Hundreds of miles behind them, the Japanese fleet continues its broken retreat toward home waters. On the battered cruiser Chikuma, Admiral Nagumo sits alone in his cabin, listening to the distant rumble of engines and the occasional moan of wounded sailors drifting through the corridors. His uniform is still stained with smoke from the Akagi. He stares at a sheet of paper filled with casualty numbers and feels the sting of humiliation settling deeper with each passing hour. He knows the Emperor will demand answers. He knows Tokyo will search for excuses, but there is no excuse. Nagumo whispers to himself, "I made the wrong decisions," though even that feels insufficient. The truth is harsher. His command was outmaneuvered, outthought, and outplayed. On the Enterprise, Carter steps into the pilot-ready room, where maps of the Pacific cover the walls. A strategist points at the Central Pacific and explains how the balance of power has already shifted. Japan has lost the offensive capability. Their carrier air wings were their spear. Now the spear is broken. The pilots listen, some nodding, others frowning. Most are too fatigued to react. Carter sits at the back, staring at the map with a distant expression. He knows this war isn't close to ending, but the feeling in the room is unmistakable. The Americans can now move forward instead of backward. The Japanese tide has finally reached its high water mark and is beginning to recede. Across the ocean, Tokyo receives the first official reports of the Midway disaster. The halls of the Naval Ministry echo with hurried footsteps and whispered debates. Officers pore over maps, trying to soften the bad news before delivering it to the Emperor. But the facts are unchangeable. 4 fleet carriers, the same carriers that hammered Pearl Harbor, sank British battleships, and terrorized the Pacific, are gone. With them, Japan has lost over 200 elite pilots and crewmen whose training cannot be replaced. One admiral slams his fist on the table, shouting, "This cannot be true. We cannot lose so much in one day." But the silence that follows makes the truth undeniable. Another officer finally speaks in a trembling voice. "From this moment onward, we can no longer choose the battles we fight. America will choose them for us." It is the first time any of them say it aloud. The Empire has passed from control to desperation. Back on the American side, Carter walks the flight deck at sunset. Mechanics work around him, rearming aircraft, patching bullet-riddled fuselages, tightening bolts under portable lamps. The orange glow of the setting sun reflects off the dauntless squadrons lined up in neat rows, each one a reminder of the men who did not return. Carter pauses beside an empty spot where 2 bombers should have been. He traces a finger along the deck's scuffed wood, remembering the faces of the pilots lost during the morning chaos, their jokes, their nervous smiles, the way they tightened their gloves before every launch. The victory is historic, but the cost feels personal. In the Western Pacific, Japanese sailors gather on the deck of the cruiser Nagara as dawn breaks on their return voyage. Many stare quietly at the sea, replaying the moment the horizons lit with fire, remembering the screams of men trapped below decks, the helplessness of watching their carriers, symbols of Japan's pride, burn to their cores. A senior officer addresses the crew, telling them that Japan will rebuild, that they must hold faith in the Emperor and the nation's destiny. But the words sound thin against the morning wind. Deep down, every man knows something fundamental has cracked. The invincibility they believed in has shattered. As night falls again across the Pacific, Carter stands alone on the deck of the Enterprise, gazing at the stars. He wonders about the men on the rafts who prayed for rescue, about the Japanese pilots who went down fighting, about the admirals trying to explain the unexplainable. War has transformed the ocean into a ledger of death, and Midway has become its most defining entry. For the Americans, it is a turning point toward victory. For the Japanese, it is the beginning of a long, slow decline, one from which the Empire will never recover. The consequences of Midway stretch beyond ships and aircraft. They reach into the future of nations, strategies, and destinies. Carter takes a long breath, feeling the wind on his face. The war goes on, battles await, but from this moment forward, everyone, American or Japanese, knows the truth carried silently across the dark Pacific. Japan has lost the initiative, lost its momentum, and lost the war in all but name. June 7th, 1942. The Pacific stretches smooth and blue beneath a rising sun, but the air carries an unspoken tension, as if the ocean itself recognizes that history has just been rewritten. Aboard the USS Enterprise, Ensign William Carter stands at the starboard rail, watching the morning light shimmer across the waves. Around him, sailors move quietly, their voices low, their steps steady but heavy with the weight of the past days. The adrenaline that once fueled them has drained away, leaving behind an exhausted calm. Carter rubs the stiffness from his neck and thinks again of the moment his bomb fell. The explosion that tore open the cargo. That moment, once a blur, now replays with haunting clarity. He can still feel the dive, the crushing G-force, the blur of flak streaking past. He knows he was one pilot among many, but the enormity of what they accomplished lingers inside him like a quiet storm. Far across the sea, the Japanese fleet limps toward the safety of its home ports. Aboard the battered cruiser Tone, surviving pilots gather in a small compartment meant for briefings, though now it feels more like a chamber of mourning. Their faces are gaunt, uniforms salt-stained and torn. Many sit in silence, staring at the metal floor. Others cling to the faint hope that perhaps one carrier survived, perhaps one ship escaped the inferno. But as updated reports roll in, confirmed, verified, undeniable, the truth becomes too heavy to ignore. 4 carriers lost, 4 air groups wiped out, hundreds of elite aviators dead. A veteran pilot finally breaks the silence, whispering bitterly, "We were never meant to fight a war this long, not against an enemy with endless factories." No one argues. They all know he's right. The belief in Japan's unstoppable destiny, a belief hammered into them since childhood, has cracked so deeply it cannot be repaired. Back in Washington, D.C., military analysts gather around conference tables, maps spread across the room. Officers point at locations in the Pacific, the Aleutians, the Solomons, the Marshalls, discussing how the momentum has shifted. For months, America has been reacting, scrambling, praying for time to rebuild. Now, the tone has changed. "We're moving from survival to initiative," one officer remarks. Japan is on the defensive, whether they admit it or not. Reports from Midway continue to arrive. Photographs, damage assessments, pilot testimonies. The scale of the victory astonishes officials and energizes the nation. Factories accelerate production. Recruitment offices fill with volunteers. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, hope replaces fear. Yet the Japanese government attempts to shield the public from the truth. In Tokyo, radio broadcasts speak cautiously of intense fighting and heroic efforts, but they avoid mentioning the scale of the losses behind closed doors. However, the atmosphere is suffocating. Admirals gather in a dim hall, their faces tense as they wait for the meeting to begin. Charts of the Pacific lie on a long table, but the carriers that once symbolized the empires might have been erased from the map, replaced by empty space. When Admiral Yamamoto enters, the room falls completely silent. He walks slowly, each step weighted with the knowledge that Midway was not merely a defeat, it was the beginning of the end. He looks at the men seated before him, many avoiding his gaze out of shame or fear, and speaks with quiet gravity. "The enemy has seized the initiative. We must now fight a war of attrition, a war we are not prepared to win." The words hit the room like a torpedo. No one replies. On the Enterprise, Carter sits with his fellow pilots in the mess hall, chewing silently on a plate of scrambled eggs gone cold. The men talk in low voices about the battle, about friends who didn't return, about ships now resting at the bottom of the ocean. Someone mentions the Yorktown, and a hush falls over the table. They all watched her listing, smoke pouring from her hull. Carter swallows hard, remembering the flickering flames, the crew abandoning her with stubborn reluctance. She deserved better, someone murmurs. Another replies softly, "She brought us Midway." The room falls silent again. Across the Pacific, Japanese sailors aboard the destroyer Arashi prepare to offload survivors at a home port. Many of the men look haunted, their eyes set on nothing in particular. Some clutch personal items, photographs, diaries, small tokens of home, saved from the burning carriers. An elderly petty officer gathers a group of young sailors and tells them, voice strained, "We must be strong for our families. But remember this, the war will not end the way it began." His honesty is rare, dangerous even. But the men around him nod. They already know. They have seen the truth with their own eyes. As dusk settles over the Pacific once again, Carter returns to the deck. He watches the sky fade into deep hues of red and violet, the gentle rise and fall of the ship beneath him. Somewhere out there, the Japanese survivors drift in their own darkness, knowing their nation has crossed a line it cannot step back from. The Battle of Midway is not merely a tactical victory. It is the moment the Empire silently admits, even if only to itself, that its path forward leads not to triumph but to collapse. The implications ripple outward like waves across the sea, touching every island, every ship, every pilot who will fight in the years still to come. Carter closes his eyes briefly, letting the wind brush against his face. The war is far from over, but Midway has reshaped it. The world has shifted, and both sides feel the tremor. June 8th, 1942. The Pacific has regained its deceptive calm, its waves rolling in gentle, rhythmic patterns, as though trying to hide the violence that took place only days earlier. Aboard the USS Enterprise, Ensign William Carter walks along the hangar deck, watching mechanics remove jagged metal fragments from Dauntless fuselages, tighten bullet-riddled panels, and inspect cracked propellers. The workers move with efficient precision, but their faces are weary, their clothes stained by grease and smoke. Carter pauses beside an aircraft bearing fresh scorch marks. He runs a hand along the battered wing and feels a shiver at the memory of the flak bursts he flew through. Every scar on every aircraft tells a story, some of survival, others of pilots who will never return. Hundreds of miles away, the Japanese Naval High Command meets again in a windowless room in Tokyo. A heavy silence fills the chamber as officers sit around a long table, each man acutely aware of the magnitude of the crisis. A large map dominates the wall, showing the Pacific Ocean with arrows and markers that once represented Japan's expanding influence. Now, many of those markers have been hastily removed, leaving empty patches that seem to grow larger by the hour. Reports detailing the loss of 4 carriers lie neatly stacked before each officer. Some men read them with clenched jaws, others with shaking hands. One admiral finally says, "Our ability to wage offensive war is ended." No one argues. This is not speculation, it is fact. On the Enterprise, Admiral Spruant stands on the bridge, discussing the next steps with his senior officers. The Midway victory has opened possibilities across the Pacific. Defensive lines that once seemed unassailable are now vulnerable. Guadalcanal, one officer suggests quietly. Spruant nods, knowing the strategic value of that distant island. America is shifting from surviving to attacking, from reacting to shaping the war. The Japanese Navy, once feared and unstoppable, is now forced into a corner. Carter overhears some of the sailors discussing this change in tone as they work on the deck. "We're not just fighting back anymore," one of them says. "We're pushing forward," another replies. "Just don't forget, pushing forward still gets people killed." The men fall silent, aware that future battles will be brutal. On the Japanese cruiser Kumano, sailors stand on the deck as their ship approaches Yokosuka Naval Base. The coastline appears through a thin curtain of fog, but instead of pride, the sight fills the men with dread. They know what awaits: questions, reprimands, perhaps even shame from the public once the full truth emerges. One young sailor grips the railing and whispers, "How do we return home after this?" The petty officer beside him answers, "With our heads low, but alive. That has to be enough." When the ship finally docks, The wounded are carried ashore, wrapped in blankets. Nurses rush to assist them, but many avert their eyes, unable to face the sailors' haunted expressions. Japan has never known a naval defeat of this scale. The shock runs through the population like an unspoken tremor. Back at Midway Atoll, American crews sift through debris washed ashore, pieces of aircraft, fragments of fuel tanks, bullet-ridden metal. Some items are tagged and stored as intelligence material. Others are set aside in silent tribute to the men who fought here. Carter's squadron lands briefly on the island to refuel, and he steps onto the sandy ground, feeling the gritty texture beneath his boots. The bunkers still smell of gunpowder. The runways are scorched from bombardment, but the island stands, Midway holds, and that fact alone represents the first major halt to Japan's sweeping conquest. In Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt receives the full battle report. Advisors gather around him, outlining how the victory alters the global balance. Roosevelt reads slowly, lips pressed into a thin line. When he finishes, he looks up and says, "Then we move. The Pacific is changing. We must meet that change before the enemy regroups." His words set in motion the next phase of the war, one defined not by retreat, but by determined advance. As night drapes itself over the Pacific, Carter returns to the flight deck of the Enterprise, where a cool breeze sweeps across the metal surface. The ship cuts steadily through the dark water, her wake glowing faintly in the moonlight. Carter gazes upward at the stars, each one twinkling as if unaware of the human struggles below. He thinks again of the Japanese sailors sailing home in silence, the admirals in Tokyo facing the impossible truth, the pilots who will never fly again. The Midway victory is monumental, but its shadow stretches even longer. It will reshape strategies, morale, and the very identity of two nations locked in a brutal contest. Carter leans against the rail, the wind tugging gently at his jacket. The war continues, but the direction has changed. The tide has turned, not in a single wave, but in a powerful shift that will carry the Allies forward, island by island, mile by mile, until the Pacific itself feels different beneath their feet. And for the Japanese Empire, the road ahead narrows with every passing day, the consequences of Midway echoing into their future like a relentless drumbeat. June 9th, 1942, the USS Enterprise sails through calm seas under a sky streaked with thin white clouds. The hum of engines steady beneath the deck. Ensign William Carter stands near the island's superstructure, sipping from a tin cup of bitter coffee as he watches the horizon around him. The mood aboard the ship has shifted from tension to a heavy, reflective quiet. The crew knows the magnitude of their accomplishment, but victory carries a strange weight, one that neither erases grief nor softens the memories of the battle. Men speak softly, sharing fragments of what they saw: burning decks, spiraling aircraft, the shock on sailors' faces as their ships erupted beneath them. Carter listens without adding much. His own memories are still too sharp, too loud. Thousands of miles away in Tokyo, the Imperial General Headquarters begins drafting official statements for the press. The goal is to protect morale, to shield the public from the harsh truth that the Empire's prized carriers rest at the bottom of the sea. A carefully worded announcement claims that Japan achieved some successes at Midway, a phrase so vague it borders on meaningless. Behind closed doors, however, the atmosphere is grim. High-ranking officers argue over strategy, intelligence failures, and the chain of command during the battle. One admiral slams his fist on the table and shouts, "We underestimated the Americans. We assumed they would break." Another counters bitterly, "We believed our own myths." The room falls silent. For the first time in the war, no one dares to speak confidently of victory. On the Japanese carrier docks, in Kuri and Yokosuka, shipyard workers stare at empty berths that once held the Akagi and Kaga. Mechanics who maintained the aircraft now walk the length of the pier in silence, unable to comprehend the scale of the losses. Families gather nearby, desperate for news. Rumours swirl. Some say only one carrier was lost, others claim 3. Still others whisper that all 4 are gone. A young boy clings to his mother's kimono, asking, Will father's ship come home? She kneels, forcing a smile she doesn't feel, and whispers, "We must wait," but her eyes betray the truth. She knows she may never see her husband again. Meanwhile, aboard the Enterprise, Admiral Spruance meets with senior officers to plan the next phase. The battle has shifted the Pacific balance, but the war remains enormous, stretching across thousands of miles of ocean. Spruance studies a map dotted with islands, Guadalcanal, Tulagi, the Solomons, and says, "We must press the advantage before Japan rebuilds any strength." The officers nod, understanding that the coming months will demand relentless operations. The cost will be high, but resting now would give Japan time it cannot be allowed to have. Carter, overhearing part of the discussion, realizes that Midway was not an end. It was the beginning of a new, harder chapter. Across the Western Pacific, the Japanese Navy attempts to reorganize. Surviving officers from the Hiryū and Soryu gather aboard the cruiser Mogami. Reviewing damage reports and survivor lists, many names are missing. One pilot, his arm in a sling, stares at the list long after the meeting ends, tracing a finger over the names of his friends. "They trained for years," he whispers, "and now, gone." A nearby officer replies quietly, "Japan cannot replace men like them, not anymore." The realization spreads through the fleet like a shadow. The Empire's greatest strength, its elite naval aviators, has been gutted. In Washington, Congress receives classified briefings detailing the battle. The sense of relief is palpable. Midway has given the United States what it desperately needed: time and momentum. Senators speak of increased production, faster pilot training, and a new wave of carriers nearing completion. One naval officer announces confidently, "By next year, we will outbuild Japan 4-1, another adds. Their defeat at Midway will echo for the rest of the war. Not everyone celebrates. Some remind the room that thousands of American lives still lie ahead in the jungles, seas, and skies of the Pacific. But one fact unites them all: Japan has passed the point of no return. On the Enterprise, Carter returns to the flight deck in the late afternoon. The sun hangs low, turning the ocean gold. He watches a group of sailors painting over scorch marks on the deck, their brushes moving in slow, deliberate strokes. One of them pauses, leans on his knee, and says, "Funny thing, you fight for your life one day, and the next you're painting wood." Carter smiles faintly. War shifts quickly, he thinks. One moment you're diving through flak, the next you're trying to pretend everything is normal. Across the sea, Japanese sailors aboard the destroyer Naval perform a small ceremony as they scatter flowers over the water in memory of their fallen carrier comrades. A lieutenant offers a quiet prayer, voice trembling with emotion. "May their spirits guide the Empire," he says. But as the petals drift across the waves, many of the sailors cannot shake the feeling that something irreversible has happened. They feel it in the way their officers speak, in the silence of the docks, in the despair of the wounded being carried ashore. The Empire has begun its descent, not with a crash, but with a slow, unstoppable slide. As night falls, Carter leans against the rail once more, watching the stars appear one by one. The air is cool, the ship steady beneath his boots. He reflects on the immense shift set in motion by the battle, how a single day of fire and courage has reshaped the Pacific War. The Japanese Navy may continue to fight with determination, but the shadow of Midway stretches behind every strategy, every deployment, every island they attempt to defend. The Americans are no longer the ones running. The tide has turned, and the ocean itself seems to know it. June 10th, 1942. A grey curtain of low clouds hangs over the Pacific as the USS Enterprise pushes steadily eastward, her wake cutting a long white scar through the water. Ensign William Carter walks the narrow catwalk along the island structure, feeling the metal warm beneath the morning sun. Around him, the ship hums with the quieter rhythm of post-battle operations, less frantic than before, but far from peaceful. Sailors mend cables, patch holes, and take careful inventory of every bomb, torpedo, and gallon of aviation fuel remaining. The ship bears the scars of Midway, and Carter finds himself tracing one of the shrapnel dents on the metal bulkhead. Imagining the moment it struck, he knows the battle is over, but its echoes feel like they're still rolling across the ocean. Across the sea, in Tokyo, the Imperial Naval Staff convenes once more, this time in a larger chamber meant for major war councils. The room is tense, the air thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken fear. Dozens of officers sit around the table, their expressions grave as they study charts and casualty lists. At the head of the room sits Admiral Osami Nagano, Chief of the Naval General Staff, his face pale and drawn. When he speaks, his voice is harsh. "We have suffered a devastating loss. Our carrier force has been crippled. The air divisions that carried the Imperial Navy from victory to victory, destroyed." No one interrupts. They know the truth. For months they believed Japan could dictate the shape of the Pacific War. Now, the illusion has shattered. The conversation turns to replacements. Factories are producing new ships. Yes, but slowly. Pilots can be trained, but not quickly enough. One senior officer finally breaks the silence. "We cannot rebuild what we have lost," he admits quietly. "Not before the Americans grow stronger." The thought sends a chill through the room. Japan has lost not only ships, but time. Aboard the Enterprise, Carter joins a small group of pilots in the wardroom, where a chalkboard lists the squadron's remaining aircraft. Some planes are marked with check marks, others with X's. Two pilots who should have been eating at the table are gone forever. Their seats empty, like ghostly reminders. The men eat in silence. Someone mutters, "The Japanese will come back at us somewhere else." Another replies, "Let them. They're bleeding now." Carter doesn't speak. He knows the enemy is far from beaten, but he also senses the shift that everyone talks about for the first time. The Americans are thinking ahead, planning offensives, not retreats. In Tokyo Bay, the cruiser Kumano arrives home carrying wounded from the battle. Medical teams hurry down the pier. Officers salute the flag, but their gestures lack confidence. Families wait at a distance, clutching small children and offering silent prayers. The survivors disembark slowly, some limping, others supported by comrades. Their faces tell the story more clearly than any communique. The story of a defeat so profound it has shaken the core of the Imperial Navy. A doctor whispers to a nurse, "They're all in shock, not just physically." At the base headquarters, an intelligence officer compiles what little remains of the carrier air groups. The lists are horrifyingly short. Veteran after veteran, killed, missing, or unaccounted for. "It will take years to recover these losses," he murmurs. "Years we do not have." Back in Washington, military planners gather around long tables, studying maps and discussing the next phase of the Pacific campaign. Notes and arrows mark future operations, places like the Solomons and New Guinea. One officer taps Midway on the map and says, "This is the pivot point. Everything before was defense. Everything after, offense." Others nod. There is no triumphalism in the room, only determination. They know the war will demand extraordinary sacrifice, but they also know that Japan's aura of invincibility is gone. The psychological shift is enormous. For the first time, American commanders can feel the war turning. As the sun sets, Carter steps out onto the flight deck. The ocean glows orange beneath the fading light. A warm breeze moves across the ship, carrying the faint scent of oil and salt. He watches sailors securing aircraft for the night, their movements calm and practiced. The sounds of tools clicking, wheels dragging, and metal latches locking into place create a steady rhythm. Carter breathes deeply, letting the air fill his lungs. He thinks of the Japanese sailors somewhere across this vast ocean, returning home not as heroes, but as survivors of a disaster their leaders will struggle to explain. He thinks of the admirals in Tokyo, debating strategies they no longer have the resources to execute. And he thinks of the words that echo through every American ship after Midway, "We can win this." The war is far from over. The jungles, reefs, and skies of the Pacific will demand more blood, more courage, more sacrifice. But from this point on, the trajectory is set. The Empire is wounded, not mortally yet, but deeply, irreversibly, and the United States has seized the initiative with a grip it will not loosen. Carter rests his hands on the railing and closes his eyes. The wind brushes past him. The ship moves steadily forward. Midway is behind them, but its shadow stretches long across the ocean, shaping every decision, every battle, every fate still to come. June 11th, 1942. The morning sun rises over the Pacific in soft shades of pink and gold, casting a calm glow across the USS Enterprise. The ship's engines thrum steadily beneath the deck, a reminder that the journey back to Pearl Harbor is underway. Ensign William Carter stands near the bow, the wind tugging at his flight jacket as he watches the wake stretching out behind them like a long white ribbon unraveling across the sea. The ocean looks peaceful, too peaceful for a place that, just days earlier, had been filled with fire and wreckage. Carter inhales deeply, catching the faint scent of salt mixed with engine oil, and lets the cool air settle his nerves. The adrenaline of battle has faded, replaced by a quiet introspection. Across the Pacific, Japan's political and military leaders gather in a heavily guarded conference room in Tokyo. The air is thick with the tension of men who know the country has crossed a line it cannot retreat from. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo sits at the head of the table, his jaw clenched as he listens to reports from surviving fleet commanders. The accounts are grim, the losses incalculable. Navy Minister Shigetaro Shimada tries to maintain composure, but his voice betrays anxiety as he outlines potential strategies for stabilizing the front. "We must fortify our perimeter," he insists. "We must hold the line in the Solomons, in New Guinea, in the Marshalls, anywhere the Americans might strike next." But the silence in the room makes clear that everyone understands the truth. Japan is no longer dictating the pace of the war. Back on the Enterprise, Carter enters the briefing room where pilots sit in a loose circle, sipping coffee and speaking in low tones. The walls are covered in maps of the Pacific, but the atmosphere is different now, less frantic, more focused. Their commanding officer steps forward and begins outlining the lessons learned from Midway: flight formations, timing, dive angles, radio discipline. It is not a victory celebration, it is preparation. The pilots absorb every detail, understanding that future battles will require even more precision and resilience. Carter takes notes quietly, glancing occasionally at the empty chairs where two of his fellow aviators once sat. Their loss lingers in the room like a cold draft. Meanwhile, in Pearl Harbor, naval intelligence officers work late into the night, deciphering new Japanese communications. The Midway victory has opened doors. They now have more resources, more confidence, and more reason than ever to push deeper into the intelligence war. One officer circles a set of coordinates on a chart and says, "They're fortifying positions east of New Guinea. They're scared. We can use that," another replies. "If they're retreating behind stronger defenses, it means they're expecting us." The mood in the room is electric. The Americans are no longer guessing. They are planning. In Japan, the psychological impact is even more profound. Newspapers print cautious headlines, avoiding specifics. Radio broadcasts emphasize heroism and resilience, but avoid mentioning the lost carriers. Still, word spreads quietly through naval towns. Mothers gather outside barracks, whispering rumors. Children overhear guarded conversations. One elderly fisherman in Yokosuka tells a group of younger men, "A nation is like a ship. When the keel breaks, it still floats for a while, but the course is already lost." His grim metaphor captures the atmosphere perfectly. Japan is still afloat, but the sense of invincibility has sunk. Aboard the Enterprise, Carter returns to the flight deck after sundown. The sky above is clear, stars glittering like sharp silver points against a vast black canvas. Sailors move calmly along the deck, securing aircraft and performing routine maintenance with quiet efficiency. Carter leans against the railing, watching the dim outline of the horizon as the ship pushes eastward. He thinks of the Japanese sailors returning to their home ports in silence, their sense of pride collapsing under the weight of the defeat. He imagines the admirals in Tokyo debating strategies they know they cannot execute, and he feels the future pressing forward, a future defined not by fear, but by determination. The Battle of Midway did more than sink ships. It reshaped minds, rewrote expectations, and drew a line in the Pacific that separated the first half of the war from the second. Before Midway, Japan advanced like a rising tide. After Midway, that tide began to fall, slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, but inevitably. Carter watches the dark waves slip past the ship and thinks, for the first time since the war began, that victory is not just possible, it is beginning. June 12, 1942, the USS Enterprise cruises eastward beneath a pale sky, its deck still marked by the scars of battle. Ensign William Carter walks along the port side, hands tucked into his flight jacket pockets, as he watches the waves sparkle in the morning light. He feels the ship vibrating beneath his boots, a steady, living heartbeat that reassures him the fleet is moving toward home, toward repair, toward the next phase of the war. The days since Midway have blurred together, a mixture of briefings, maintenance drills, and reflective silence. The crew speaks less now, but with a quiet confidence that hadn't existed before the battle. Something has shifted, not just in strategy, but in spirit. Across the ocean, in the naval district of Kure, a group of Japanese apprentices gathers at the entrance of a hangar where once proud carrier aircraft were repaired and maintained. The hangar is almost empty now, its concrete floor bare except for a few surviving Zero fighters that technicians examine with somber expressions. An elderly mechanic kneels beside a dismounted engine, brushes soot from its metal surface, and whispers, "These machines were the wings of the Empire." A younger apprentice hesitates before asking, "Will new ones come?" The mechanic doesn't answer. The silence speaks for him. Japan's factories cannot produce replacements quickly enough, especially without the veteran craftsmen and pilots lost at Midway. In Tokyo, a private meeting unfolds at the Imperial Palace. Emperor Hirohito listens as military leaders attempt to explain the defeat. Their words are careful, measured, burdened by fear of consequence. They speak of weather, luck, timing, anything to soften the magnitude of the disaster. But the emperor, usually reserved, asks one pointed question: can we still win? The room freezes. Admiral Nagumo eventually bows deeply and replies, "Your Majesty, victory will now require miracles." The quiet that follows is crushing. Even the emperor senses the shift. The war Japan began with such confidence has transformed into a struggle for survival. Meanwhile, aboard the Enterprise, Carter joins a group of pilots on the hangar deck, where they help inspect the remaining Dauntless dive bombers. The mechanics work tirelessly, crawling under wings, tightening bolts, patching metal, replacing worn components. Carter kneels beside one of the aircraft and runs a hand along its fuselage, still bearing battle scars. The aircraft smells of oil, sweat, and gunpowder residue, a scent that has become inseparable from war. A fellow pilot remarks quietly, "Hard to believe these birds changed the whole course of the Pacific." Carter nods but says nothing. He knows luck, timing, and courage all played a part. He also knows the enemy fought with the same determination. War is rarely simple. In Japan, naval instructors at flight schools assess the new crop of cadets. Many are teenagers, bright-eyed, patriotic, inexperienced. An instructor watches them perform formation drills and realizes with a hollow feeling that these boys will soon be asked to replace the veterans lost at Midway. He marks a name on his clipboard, then pauses, staring at the paper. "They're too young," he murmurs. A fellow instructor responds with weary resignation. "Youth is all we have left." The loss of Japan's finest pilots is no longer an abstraction. It is a daily reality reshaping the very core of its strategy. Back on the Enterprise, Admiral Spruance meets with his senior staff in the planning room, where maps and reports fill the long table. He points at key positions across the Pacific and outlines how the American offensive will unfold in the coming months. The Solomon Islands, New Guinea, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, operation after operation, a chain of stepping stones leading closer and closer to Japan. The officers listen with grim determination. The war will be long, brutal, and unforgiving, but now they can see the path ahead. Carter overhears part of the conversation and feels a renewed sense of purpose settle over him. Midway is not an ending, it is a beginning. Across the Pacific, Japanese sailors aboard the light cruiser Sendai prepare for a late evening ceremony honouring the dead of Midway. Lanterns are lit along the deck, their soft glow reflecting off the calm water. Officers stand in solemn formation as a chaplain reads prayers, his voice carrying gently over the waves. One sailor holds a folded uniform belonging to a fallen friend. He tightens his grip and whispers, "We fought with honour, but honour is not enough." As the lanterns drift away on the current, the crew watches them fade into the distance, each light a symbol of loss and of a future growing darker. That same night, Carter returns to the flight deck, where the stars shimmer against the vast black sky. The wind cools his face as he leans against the railing, listening to the ship's steady hum. He imagines the Japanese fleet in their silent despair, the admirals in Tokyo confronting the unthinkable, the young cadets preparing for a war they are too inexperienced to understand. Midway has cracked the rising sun, not with a single blow, but with fractures spreading deeper each day. For the first time in the conflict, Japan is no longer rising, it is struggling to stay afloat. Carter closes his eyes for a moment and lets the breeze steady him. The Pacific War has changed forever, and every sailor, every pilot, every nation involved feels the shift. Victory is no longer a dream, it is a direction, one the United States will now pursue with relentless resolve. June 13th, 1942. The Pacific stretches calm and blue beneath the USS Enterprise as she continues her voyage back to Pearl Harbor. Ensign William Carter stands on the upper deck, shielding his eyes against the bright morning sun. The sea looks almost innocent, tranquil waves rolling in slow, shimmering patterns, but beneath that stillness lies the memory of fire, screams, and sinking steel. Carter breathes in deeply, letting the salt air fill his lungs. He isn't thinking of glory or triumph. He is thinking of the pilots who didn't return, the men he shook hands with the morning of the battle, who are now names on a list. Across the ocean, Japan faces its darkest week since the war began. In the city of Hiroshima, long before it becomes infamous for another tragedy, workers at the naval yards gather in hushed groups, whispering about rumours of lost ships. Many have sons aboard the carriers that sailed for Midway. A young woman clutches a telegram she hasn't opened yet, tears already streaming because she knows what it will say. Her father places a trembling hand on her shoulder and murmurs, "We must be strong." But neither of them truly knows how to be strong in the face of such emptiness. In Tokyo, the Imperial Navy submits its final Midway report to the government. The numbers are brutal. 4 carriers sunk, a 5th heavily damaged, over 3,000 men killed, hundreds of elite pilots lost. Admiral Yamamoto signs the document with tense fingers, aware that history will forever assign him responsibility for this defeat. When he steps outside onto the veranda, a cool breeze moves through the palace garden. He stares at the distant rooftops of the city and feels something he has never allowed himself to feel before: futility. He had engineered Pearl Harbor, hoping to shock America into a negotiated peace. Instead, he has awakened a giant whose strength grows with each passing month. "We have lost the advantage," he whispers, though only the wind hears him. Meanwhile, aboard the Enterprise, a memorial service begins for the fallen American pilots. The entire crew gathers on the flight deck, solemn and silent. The chaplain reads names one by one, his voice steady, the list heartbreakingly long. The ocean breeze carries the words across the deck and beyond the rail into the wide horizon. Carter stands among the ranks, eyes fixed on the wooden planks beneath his boots. He remembers the laughter of the men beside him, the way they tightened their gloves before launch, the way they teased each other to hide their fear. When the chaplain finishes, a bugler raises his trumpet. The notes of taps drift through the air, soft at first, then stronger, echoing across the water. For the first time since the battle, Carter feels tears burn behind his eyes. On the Japanese cruiser Abukuma, survivors hold their own quiet ceremony. No priest stands before them, no official order has been given, just sailors gathered around a small box containing the personal items of one of their fallen pilots: a flight scarf, a photo of a smiling family, a small folded paper crane. A senior petty officer says a few words about honor and sacrifice, then closes the box and lowers it into the sea. The sailors bow their heads. One whispers, "We fought bravely, but bravery cannot change fate." His voice trembles, because he knows what the officers know, what the admirals know, what every man feels in the marrow of his bones. Midway was not a setback, it was a turning point. The Empire will never again rise as high as it stood before June the 4th. Back in Washington, the War Department finalizes strategic orders for the coming months. Midway has opened a window, and America will push through it with force. Navy planners point at the Solomon Islands on the map, discussing the possibility of landing Marines on Guadalcanal. "We must seize the initiative now," one officer declares. "Japan is reeling. If we press fast enough, they won't recover." The mood in the room is no longer one of fear. It is calculation, confidence, momentum. As dusk falls over the Enterprise, Carter walks the deck alone. The sunset bleeds red across the horizon, painting the sky with the color of both victory and loss. He grips the railing and looks out over the endless Pacific, listening to the deep rumble of the ship's engines. The war will continue, brutally, relentlessly, but the path of the future has changed. He knows that somewhere across these waters, Japanese sailors sit in their own quiet despair, understanding that Midway did more than sink ships. It sank Japan's hope of controlling the Pacific, not instantly, not visibly, but deeply, like a fracture inside a foundation that will eventually bring the entire structure down. Carter closes his eyes and exhales slowly. The tides of war have shifted, and every man left standing feels the change. Japan has not surrendered, but the moment of doom has already passed. Midway planted it like a seed, and now its roots stretch silently through every strategy meeting, every operation, every mile of ocean. June 14th, 1942, the USS Enterprise cuts through gentle swells beneath a bright midday sun, her battered hull gleaming like a survivor, wearing her scars with pride. Ensign William Carter walks the flight deck slowly, hands in his pockets, listening to the distant hum of the engines and the rhythmic clang of wrenches striking metal as mechanics finish their final round of post-battle maintenance. The air smells of oil and warm seawater. Carter watches a crewman repaint a section of the deck, the old scorched wood disappearing under fresh navy grey. War moves fast. One moment you're fighting for your life, the next you're replacing planks and tightening bolts, but the weight of Midway doesn't vanish with a coat of paint. It lingers like the smell of smoke that refuses to leave the hangar. Across the ocean, in Japan's fortified naval academy at Etajima, cadets march across the drill field under a harsh sun. Their instructors bark commands with extra sharpness, trying to restore a sense of discipline and strength. Many of the cadets still don't know the full truth of Midway, but they can feel it in the air, in the strained expressions of their officers, in the sudden urgency of their training. They are pushed harder than ever before, flying longer hours in outdated trainers, performing emergency drills until their hands shake from fatigue. During a short break, one cadet whispers to another, "Why the rush? Why now?" The second cadet glances toward a captain, watching them with hollow eyes, and replies, "Because the men meant to train us died at Midway." The truth feels like a fist closing around their futures. In Tokyo, the government struggles to manage the emotional fallout of the defeat. Senior officials meet late into the night behind locked doors, their discussions turning increasingly desperate. Proposals range from fortifying outer islands to launching new offensives. But every idea collapses under the same brutal reality. Japan no longer has the manpower or industrial capacity to regain the initiative. Admiral Shimada slumps forward in his chair, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "We must conceal the full losses," he says quietly. "If the people understand what has happened, morale will collapse." Another officer shakes his head. "Morale is already collapsing. They just don't know why yet." Meanwhile, aboard the Enterprise, the crew receives word that they will soon return to Pearl Harbor for repairs and refit. A wave of cautious relief spreads through the ship. Carter stands with a group of pilots as they watch the horizon darken into shades of deep blue. One of them lights a cigarette and says, "We'll have to go back out soon enough. The Japanese aren't finished." Another responds, "Maybe not, but they're bleeding now." Carter listens but remains quiet. He knows the next battles will demand even more from all of them. Midway was a miracle in many ways, a convergence of strategy, luck, courage, and timing unlikely to be repeated. The road forward will be fought island by island, mile by mile, with no easy victories. Across the Pacific, on the battered Japanese supply ship, Akashi, engineers work through the night repairing engines and restocking ammunition. The ship has become a kind of floating triage center for the Imperial Navy, patching up whatever remains of the fleet. The men work in near silence. Every clang of metal echoes like a reminder of what's been lost. A junior engineer wipes sweat from his brow and whispers to a colleague, "How do we fight America now?" The older man doesn't answer immediately. He stares at the sparks flying from a welding torch and says, "We endure. That is all we can do." His voice carries no conviction. In Washington, President Roosevelt's advisors prepare an address to inform the American public of the victory. They recommend emphasizing courage, sacrifice, and momentum, without revealing the code-breaking success that enabled the ambush. Roosevelt rehearses the draft quietly, pausing as he reads the line, "This battle marks the beginning of the end of enemy expansion in the Pacific." He nods. The message is accurate, even if understated. Midway has not won the war, but it has taken the reins from Japan and placed them firmly in American hands. As night settles over the Pacific once more, Carter stands on the deck of the Enterprise as the ship glides beneath a sky filled with stars. The constellations shine with cold clarity, reflecting on the smooth water below. Carter rests his arms on the railing, listening to the murmur of distant voices and the gentle slap of waves against the hull. He imagines the Japanese fleet out there, somewhere in the darkness, running, repairing, grieving, hiding their losses from their own people. He imagines their admirals staring at maps that no longer match their ambitions. Midway has become a shadow stretching across every strategy meeting, every naval base, every young pilot's future. The wind shifts, carrying a faint chill. Carter straightens, aware that the battle ahead will be long, filled with jungles, reefs, and skies that will take thousands more lives. But he also feels something steady, something grounded, the knowledge that the United States is no longer fighting a losing war. The tide has turned, not with fanfare, but with a quiet, unstoppable force set in motion on June 4th. The weight of Midway continues to press down on the Empire of Japan, cracking its foundations day by day. Carter lowers his gaze to the dark water below and whispers to himself, "This is only the beginning." June 15th, 1942. Dawn breaks over the Pacific in a slow bloom of orange and gold as the USS Enterprise approaches the final stretch of her return to Pearl Harbor. The battered carrier glides across calm seas, her silhouette sharp against the horizon, her presence a testament to survival and resolve. Ensign William Carter stands on the deck among a handful of sailors who have gathered to watch the rising sun. The light warms their tired faces and glints softly off the metal edges of the aircraft resting behind them. For the first time since the battle, Carter feels a quiet sense of closure settling inside, an understanding that Midway is no longer just a chaotic memory of dives, explosions, and burning carriers. It has become a turning point etched into history, one whose significance grows clearer with every passing day. Across the Pacific, in the halls of Japan's Naval General Staff, the mood is darker than ever. Maps of the Pacific lie unrolled across long tables, marked with hastily redrawn defensive lines. Admirals peer over them with hollow eyes, the silence occasionally broken by terse whispers. The catastrophic losses at Midway have forced Japan into a new reality, one where caution replaces ambition and desperation replaces confidence. Admiral Yamamoto, usually composed and sharp, looks older, wearier. As he studies the Western Pacific, he knows the Americans will attack soon. He knows Japan's navy will never again wield the power it did before June 4th. "The initiative is lost," he says quietly to an aide. "We must fight to delay the inevitable." The words taste like defeat even as he speaks them. Meanwhile, crowds gather on the docks of Pearl Harbor as the Enterprise approaches. Sailors' families, naval officers, and workers line the piers, waving and cheering as the ship enters the harbor. Her flight deck still scarred, her hull still battered, but her flag flying proudly. Bands begin to play, their music drifting over the water as tugboats guide the carrier into position. Carter watches the shoreline grow closer, feeling an unexpected tightness in his chest. He thinks of the men who aren't returning with them, of the carriers resting at the bottom of the sea, of the Japanese sailors now returning home in silence. This is the part of war no one can avoid, the joy of return intertwined with the grief of absence. In Tokyo, the public finally receives the first official announcement regarding Midway. The report is vague and heavily censored, mentioning intense defensive operations and courageous sacrifices, but citizens immediately sense something is wrong. Mothers visiting shrines find themselves lighting incense for sons they have not yet officially lost. Sailors on leave receive hurried orders to return to base. Merchants whisper that something terrible must have happened, something the government cannot say aloud. The rising sun banners hanging in shop windows flutter gently in the summer breeze. But beneath the surface, fear has begun to replace fervor. At the American War Department, military planners finalize the next stage of operations. The name Guadalcanal appears on charts with growing frequency. One officer taps Midway on the map and says, "This was the battle that changed everything." Another nods, adding, "From here on out, Japan fights the war we choose, not the war they want." The room hums with purpose. Midway is not only a victory, it is a strategic doorway, and the United States is stepping through it with unshakable resolve. Back aboard the Enterprise, Carter stands at the rail as the ship docks. The deck vibrates as lines are thrown and secured. Sailors begin descending the gangways, greeted by handshakes, hugs, and salutes. Carter takes one last look at the ocean, its surface shimmering calmly under the afternoon sun. It feels strange to think that this same ocean had boiled with fire and death just days before. War, he realizes, is a creature of contrasts, beauty and horror, triumph and loss, courage and fear, existing all at once. As evening settles over Pearl Harbor, Carter walks alone along the quiet pier. The air is warm, filled with the scent of diesel, salt, and distant hibiscus blossoms. He gazes at the silhouette of the Enterprise, her aircraft neatly parked, her crew moving with renewed purpose. He thinks of the Japanese pilots staring at their own darkening horizons, their future now shadowed by the irreversible consequences of Midway. The war will march forward through jungles, airstrips, reefs, and storms, but the Battle of Midway will always stand as the moment when the course of the Pacific shifted for good. Far across the sea, in a small fishing village on the coast of Honshu, an old man listens to a radio broadcast about the bravery of the Imperial Navy. He closes his eyes, understanding what the announcer will not say. "The tide has turned," he whispers to himself, "and tides do not turn back." Carter stands beneath the darkening sky, hands resting on the railing, feeling the cool wind brush his face. He does not know where the war will take him next, but he knows this. Japan's fate changed the moment its carriers burned at Midway. Their doom was not sudden. It was a slow, spreading realization that would echo through every decision, every battle, every night sky for the rest of the war. And as the stars begin to appear above Pearl Harbor, Carter whispers the truth that has settled deep into every sailor's heart. This is where their fall began.